when being strong becomes a trauma response, and you don't know it. You pride yourself on being independent, on never asking for help, on handling everything alone, no matter how heavy the weight gets. And people probably admire you for it. They call you strong, resilient, the one who always has it together. But what if I told you that the very strength everyone celebrates might actually be a trauma response you developed to survive? There's a specific moment that happens in therapy when someone realizes that the independence they thought was their greatest virtue is actually a prison they built to protect themselves from disappointment. And that moment is both devastating and liberating, because everything you thought you knew about yourself suddenly shifts. Maybe you're the person who never calls when you're struggling, who turns down offers of help even when you desperately need it, who feels physically uncomfortable when someone tries to take care of you, who interprets any form of dependence as weakness. And you've told yourself, this is just who you are, that you're naturally independent. But here's what psychology has discovered. When independence becomes so extreme that you can't ask for help, even when you're drowning, that's not strength. That's hyperindependence, and it's one of the most misunderstood trauma responses in mental health. I'm Sergiu Popovici, and this is Psychology by Sergiu Popovici. Let me start by explaining what hyperindependence actually is, because it's not the same thing as healthy independence. And confusing the two is exactly what keeps people trapped in this pattern for decades. Healthy independence means you're capable of taking care of yourself, but you can also recognize when you need support. You can ask for help without shame. You can accept assistance without feeling like you're losing yourself. Hyperindependence is an extreme form of self-reliance where you feel reluctant and unable to ask for help from others, struggling to trust and rely on anyone, believing you must accomplish everything completely alone, not because you want to, but because you genuinely feel you have no choice. Research shows that hyperindependence typically develops as a response to childhood trauma, specifically situations where a child learns that they cannot rely on others to meet their needs. And this learning happens in environments where the people who were supposed to protect them either weren't there, weren't capable, or actively caused harm. Think about what happens to a child who asks for help and is ignored, or asks for comfort and is rejected, or expresses a need and is punished for it, or worse, has to take care of the adult who should be taking care of them. That child's brain draws a very logical conclusion. It decides that asking for help is dangerous, that depending on others leads to disappointment or harm, that survival requires complete self-sufficiency. Parentification is a form of childhood trauma where there is a role reversal between the caregiver and the child, where the parent imposes their unmet emotional, physical, or psychological needs onto the child. And this is one of the most common origins of hyperindependence in adults. Imagine being 8 years old and having to comfort your parent through their breakdowns, or being 10 and managing household finances because your parent is irresponsible, or being 12 and mediating your parents' fights. What that child learns is not resilience in the healthy sense. What they learn is that their needs don't matter, that other people cannot be trusted to show up, that asking for help is futile or dangerous. And this learning becomes so deeply embedded that decades later, as adults, they still operate from this framework without realizing it. Fast forward into adulthood, and they may suffer from anxiety, anger problems, or depression. And as adults, they now choose to push others away and live in a state of hyperindependence, out of fear of falling back into a caretaking role. Childhood neglect is another major contributor. And I'm not just talking about traumatic neglect. I'm talking about emotional unavailability, about parents who are physically present but emotionally absent, about caregivers who provided food and shelter but not comfort or support. When people experience situations where their needs were not met by others, they learn to rely solely on themselves, and this behavior is a protective mechanism intended to prevent future disappointment or hurt. And here's what makes this so insidious. The child who develops hyperindependence often appears to be thriving. They're the responsible one, the mature one. the one who doesn't cause problems, and everyone misses the fact that this child is experiencing a trauma response that will affect their ability to form healthy relationships for the rest of their life unless it's addressed. Research on attachment theory shows that children who experience consistent neglect or inconsistent caregiving often develop what's called an avoidant attachment style, and this manifests in adulthood as hyperindependence, as difficulty with emotional intimacy, as a deep-seated belief that depending on others is weakness or danger. Now, let's talk about what hyperindependence actually looks like in adult life, because many people hearing this are thinking, but that's not me. I'm just independent. And they're not recognizing the subtle ways this trauma response is controlling their life. You struggle intensely with asking for help, not because you're proud, but because asking feels genuinely dangerous or shameful, like you're admitting weakness or setting yourself up for disappointment. And even when you're overwhelmed or on the verge of breaking down, you tell people you're fine. You may appear cold and distant, but in fact you fear disappointment and rejection most of all, and your reserved personality is actually a form of protection. You take on too much responsibility. You overcommit to work and personal projects. You handle tasks that should be shared or delegated, not because you enjoy it, but because the alternative creates intense anxiety. Because hyper-independent individuals struggle to hand off responsibilities, they may easily burn out or feel overwhelmed with commitments. You have difficulty trusting others, and I don't just mean with big things. I mean trusting them to show up, to follow through, to not disappoint you. And this lack of trust isn't because people have consistently failed you recently. It's because your nervous system learned decades ago that people are fundamentally unreliable. You feel uncomfortable or even anxious when people try to help you or take care of you. Like there's a voice saying, this isn't safe, or they're going to want something in return. And these thoughts might not even be conscious. They might just manifest as physical discomfort when someone offers support. You pride yourself on never being a burden, on being low maintenance, on not needing things from others. And you've constructed your entire identity around this self-sufficiency. But underneath that pride is usually a deep fear that if you did need things, people would leave or hurt you. You struggle with vulnerability in relationships because vulnerability requires trusting someone with your needs, your fears, your struggles, and your nervous system has categorized vulnerability as a threat. So when relationships deepen and require more emotional intimacy, you either sabotage them or create distance. And here's the pattern many hyper-independent people don't recognize. You're often attracted to people who need you, who are struggling, who require caretaking, because being needed feels safer than needing someone else. And this recreates the childhood dynamic where you had to be the caretaker, which perpetuates the trauma rather than healing it. What's happening in your brain and nervous system when you're operating from hyper-independence is fascinating and heartbreaking. And understanding this helps explain why this pattern is so hard to break. When children experience trauma where vulnerability equals danger, their developing nervous system learns that help-seeking is a threat to survival, and not asking for help becomes a trauma response because the brain has categorized help-seeking as dangerous. Your amygdala, a part of your brain responsible for detecting threats, has been conditioned to perceive dependence on others as danger. And when you consider asking for help, your nervous system activates the same threat response it would activate if you are facing actual physical danger. And here's why this is so resistant to change when you repeatedly choose isolation over connection. Your nervous system begins to interpret help-seeking as dangerous, and hyperindependence actually rewires your brain, strengthening the neural pathways that associate independence with safety. This is why people can understand intellectually that their hyperindependence is problematic. They can see how it's damaging their relationships. But when the moment comes to actually ask for help, they physically cannot do it. The trauma response overrides their conscious intentions. Now, I want to address something that makes hyperindependence particularly difficult. Recognize and treat our culture celebrates exactly these traits. especially in Western societies where individualism and self-reliance are considered virtues, where needing help is subtly stigmatized as weakness. This cultural context means that people with hyper-independence trauma often receive positive reinforcement for their trauma response. They're praised for being strong, independent, reliable, and nobody recognizes that underneath that impressive exterior is someone who is profoundly isolated and unable to experience the support and connection that are fundamental human needs. There's also a gender dimension to this that's worth examining, because hyperindependence manifests differently and is perceived differently based on gender. Women may feel pressure to prove they don't need anyone, leading to exhaustion and isolation. And this is often tied to messages about being a strong, independent woman, about not needing anyone, about handling everything yourself. And while there's nothing wrong with female empowerment, when it crosses into hyperindependence, when women are so fiercely self-sufficient that they can't accept help even when they're struggling, that's not empowerment. That's trauma masquerading as strength. Let me be very clear: recognizing hyperindependence as a trauma response is not about pathologizing healthy independence or suggesting that people should become dependent. It's about recognizing when self-reliance has become so extreme that it's causing harm. The goal is not to eliminate independence. The goal is to develop what psychologists call interdependence, which is the ability to be both independent and connected, to be self-sufficient while also recognizing that humans need and benefit from support. So how do you begin to heal from hyperindependence when the very nature of the trauma response makes it difficult to seek help? And this is where the challenge becomes particularly complex, because the solution requires doing the thing the trauma response was designed to prevent. The first step is recognition, acknowledging that your extreme independence is not just a personality trait, but a trauma response that developed to protect you from harm. And that protection was necessary then, but might be limiting you now. Addressing the underlying fears and experiences contributing to hyperindependence and developing trust in others are crucial steps. And therapy, self-reflection, and practicing vulnerability can help manage hyperindependence rooted in trauma. Trauma-focused therapies, particularly approaches like EMDR and somatic therapies that work with the nervous system, can help process the original experiences that created the hyperindependence response and gradually retrain your brain to recognize that dependence on trustworthy others is not dangerous. But beyond formal therapy, there are practices you can begin implementing that start to challenge the hyperindependence pattern. And I want to be realistic. These will feel uncomfortable. They will activate your trauma response. The goal is to gradually build tolerance for it. Start with what therapists call micro-practices of asking for and accepting help in low-stakes situations. Maybe letting someone hold a door for you without saying, "I got it." Maybe accepting when someone offers to pick something up for you. Maybe asking a friend for a small favor. These practices help retrain your nervous system to recognize that accepting help doesn't lead to disaster, that people can be reliable without expecting something manipulative in return. Practice identifying and expressing your needs, which for many hyper-independent people is surprisingly difficult because they've spent so long not acknowledging that they have needs or convincing themselves that their needs don't matter. Start by just noticing when you have a need. Don't act on it yet if that feels too difficult. Just internally acknowledge, "I need help with this." And over time, practice voicing those needs to safe people in your life. Work on building what's called distress tolerance, which is the ability to sit with uncomfortable emotions rather than immediately taking action to make them go away. Because part of what drives hyperindependence is the intense discomfort that arises when you consider depending on others. And perhaps most importantly, examine and challenge the beliefs underlying your hyperindependence. Beliefs like asking for help is weak, or people will leave if I'm not strong. And ask yourself where these beliefs came from, whether they're actually true in your current life, or whether they're protective conclusions you drew as a child that are no longer serving you. Let me address something that comes up frequently when people start recognizing their hyperindependence, the fear that healing from it means becoming needy or dependent. And this fear is understandable, but based on a false dichotomy. Healing from hyperindependence doesn't mean becoming helpless. It means expanding your range of options. It means being able to choose independence when it serves you and choose interdependence when that serves you better. It means having the flexibility to both give and receive support. The goal is integration, not elimination. You don't lose your capability and strength. You add to it the ability to be vulnerable, to receive care, to trust selectively, to ask for help when you need it. And this actually makes you more resilient, because true resilience includes the ability to access and utilize support systems. I want to close by acknowledging something that makes hyperindependence particularly painful. It often means that even when you're suffering, even when you're overwhelmed, you're surrounded by people who have no idea you're struggling because you've become so skilled at appearing fine. And those people aren't failing you by not helping. They're responding to the signals you're sending that you don't need help. So part of healing is learning to send different signals, to let people see when you're struggling, to allow relationships to be reciprocal. If you recognize yourself in this description, I want you to understand that your hyperindependence made sense given what you experienced. It was an intelligent adaptation to an environment where dependence wasn't safe. But that environment isn't your current reality, and the strategies that protected you then might be preventing you from experiencing the connection and support that you deserve now. And recognizing that doesn't dishonor your strength. It honors your capacity for healing. Your independence was a shield you needed, but shields can also become cages, and you don't have to spend your life behind that protection anymore. Not with everyone, not in every situation, not when you're with people who have proven themselves trustworthy. Healing is possible. Connection without danger is possible. Receiving support without losing yourself is possible. And the journey from hyperindependence to healthy interdependence might be one of the most liberating things you ever do. If this video resonated with you, subscribe to Psychology by Sergiu Popovici and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future deep dives into trauma responses and the hidden patterns that shape our lives. Leave a comment below sharing your experience with hyperindependence. When did you first recognize it in yourself? What has helped you begin to heal? Or what questions do you still have? These conversations help create community for people who have spent too long thinking they were alone in this struggle. Thank you for watching, and remember, needing help doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. I'll see you in the next one.